person that can easily take, oh, I've got a slack here, I can push that back. You go back to back to back to back. So one flight miss, you could just have a cascading crisis, Johnny.
That's like me. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
life.
indeed. So anyway, listen, everybody, welcome to Brainfood Live on Air, bringing it to you every Friday, no fail. It's episode 262. Would you believe it? That's nearly 5 years worth of constantly live streaming at the industry. Over 5 years, actually. So we're still blasting through. And today we're going to change it up, folks. We're going to change it up because rare opportunities. It's a rare opportunity to have a chat with a person who's not only a personal friend, but an individual I think has just made a huge impact into the recruitment universe. And in fact, someone who is like significantly more famous than anybody I know. I mean, everyone knows Johnny Campbell. That is a fact. So I wanted to grab Johnny. We're going to switch away from the panel style. I wanted to grab him today and talk about a topic I think we're both quite interested in discussing, particularly with a bit of a honest but critical lens, because it's going to be an important factor in the future of how we in recruitment and HR do our work. But we want to make sure that we hammer out all of the issues in advance of implementation, let's say, because we need to explore exactly what the potential problems are going to be before we actually encounter them in the fields. And this is what we're going to talk about: skills-based hiring. So if you're interested in skills-based hiring, this is the show for you. Quick sound check, everybody. I want to make sure everyone on Crowdcast can hear me okay. So let me know if the audio and video is fine. Just let me know in the chat there, folks. We should be live streaming this on certainly my LinkedIn. I think a bunch of other LinkedIns as well. So if you're hearing this on LinkedIn, just let me know in a comment real quick whether you can hear me okay. And we should be good to go. Okay, thumbs up. That's all we need. I tell you what, emojis are efficient, mate. Efficient way to communicate. Pro emoji. All right, thank you, Caroline. That's a bit of a passive aggressive. Yes, okay today. Apologies for the bad tech previous. I get it. It has been bad and it's been my internet, but I've fixed it hopefully. All right, let's get on with it. Johnny, for the few people who don't know you, you might as well introduce yourself. Who are you? What is you do, mate?
So I'm a former recruiter. I've done this all my life, my professional life. Started recruiting an agency 2 weeks before my 21st birthday. Eventually set up my own business 10 odd years later. That spun into a training company that was called SocialTalent, which to an online platform. That is the platform today that teaches actually more than 1 million people around the world how to recruit. Whether you're a recruiter, whether you're a hiring manager. Most recently, we kind of done some candidate enablement in terms of trying to help candidates prepare better for the interview process and hiring process as well. So I'm passionate about hiring excellence, making stuff work. I'm a father of 4 boys, 5, 9, 9 and 15. Live in Dublin, Ireland, travel a lot, as we were saying at the start. And love getting into big conversations. It's great to get in your diary hung, because you're going to say you're the hard man to track down and get the diary for. And your audience may not know, is we very unusually got to catch up for breakfast during the week in London a couple of days ago. So it was a real treat.
Yeah, it was great to see you, mate. And actually, very nice breakfast. I rarely have like a posh breakfast, but that was a perfect excuse to do it. Okay, let's get on with this chat. I mean, skills-based hiring. Just to let the sort of. By the way, folks, actually, before I begin, can you quickly look at the left-hand side or right-hand side of the sidebar? There is a poll that I set up on Crowdcast at the very least. Go to that poll real quick and just give a vote on what you think about skills-based hiring right now, fad or future. I think a really important thing, just to get a sense as to where we're at. It's an interesting one to discuss. Okay, so let's talk about skills-based hiring. When did you first came across this term, Johnny? And can you do you recall when you first sort of encountered the concept of skills-based hiring, and how do you define it? Like, how do you now understand this term?
So as it's currently used, I probably first came across it maybe a year and a bit ago on a LinkedIn post. It was a LinkedIn marketing piece talking about how we need to all do skills first hiring, and we increase our talent pools by 10x. I was genuinely quite fascinated. I was like, this is interesting. As I've dug into it, I realize it isn't such a new phenomenon. It's been given many names that I have seen before, and it has an awful lot of nuance to it. The challenge that I have come across, Hung, I'll just say briefly, is that a lot of people think it's something that it is not, and that is causing problems. And we've had, since that LinkedIn post maybe a year, bit ago, I can't remember the exact time frame, that they put it out or started talking about it. We just had an enormous amount of our customers coming to us saying, we need to know more about skills first / skills based, because there's a couple of different versions of it, hiring, and when are you going to produce training and enablement for our teams. And for me, when I have a topic that our customers want training on and that we feel they need training on, I have a duty to make sure we deliver training we believe in. And there was a whole lot of training spun up real quickly. LinkedIn Learning had tons on skills first hiring. Lots of people start talking about it. And most of it, when I looked at it, was complete shit. And it just didn't sit with me. It didn't sit with me as right from day one. And so it began a journey to experiment as to what actually works, what is this, which I guess brings us to the conversation today.
What was the thing that caused you just a sense that, okay, this doesn't quite fit in right? Can you isolate that, Johnny?
Yeah, keep it simple. The simple example I use is, as I read it, as it was put out, was skills first, skills-based hiring was ignore the CV, the resume, and basically assess somebody on their pure ability on a defined list of skills that are necessary for the job and hire the person with the best skills. All right? Lovely theory. It's fantastic theory. Of course, it opens the talent pool up, potentially opens up for more inclusive hiring. But then you start thinking about the edge cases. Are we going to do that for doctors? Would you like to be operated on home by somebody who walks in and was like, do you have a medical degree? Do you have a background? Do you have experience? Well, I'd rather not discuss any of that. But what I did was I did a quiz last night. And I passed the quiz with flying colours that says I can open up your gallbladder. Let's go. Would you trust somebody to represent you in a court of law that had passed a skills-based assessment for law, but didn't necessarily prove they'd experience, didn't necessarily prove their qualifications in it? I know they're extreme examples, but you need to look to the extreme examples to test does something actually work. And I just thought, hang on a second, this doesn't work for all cases. And that might seem obvious, right? But it was being put out that this is the panacea, the cure for all hiring. And it just isn't.
All right. So first thing that's worth bearing in mind, maybe there's been, I wouldn't say an exaggeration isn't the right term, but perhaps the enthusiasm for skills-based hiring has caused people to expand it to be a universal solution to recruiting. But in fact, there's certain caveats which are quite important, domain expertise being one of them. Now, I would imagine someone who's a skills-based hiring advocate would say, no, we're not trying to say don't forget, ignore experience, but we are saying we need to bump up the assessment so that it is a little bit more testing on capability rather than relying on prestige. So I think you're right in terms of the motivation behind it was to try and not get rid of the CV, but underweight the CV, because the CV was overweighted in prior recruitment processes, and then find another way to balance that out in some way with a test. And I think the test part is definitely something that needs to happen in skills-based hiring. Am I right, folks? There is an assessment. So
like it could have been just rephrased as let's not always weight education and experience as highly as we do, and it would have been, everyone would have gone, yeah, it's a really good point. We would have left it as it is. We wouldn't be having this podcast, and would have been just fine. I think it's the fact that there's a branding around it, skills-based or skills-first hiring, that then has this visceral connotation, and then you start seeing this 10x kind of stuff. But and even if you just focus on, if you see skills-based hiring as being less focus on experience and less focus on education, which in many cases I think is a very positive thing and the right thing to do. We've been saying it for years. I read a great article yesterday that was showing that the evidence, this was from the United States, the evidence says that just taking the requirements away doesn't necessarily change the hiring outcome, in that removing skills, removing, let's say, education and removing experience from a job spec and allowing people to apply doesn't mean that the person making the hiring decision is actually going to still not hire someone who has a degree, still not hire someone who has 8 years experience. And that there's a bit of a kind of, we all feel brilliant about ourselves that we've managed to, as recruiters, to convince the world to take away education and experience as a requirement, and we feel like we're helping the world, helping the marginalized individual, and then the hiring manager still hires the same person they're always going to hire. So there's a challenge there as well.
I'd really love to see that article. That's very interesting. If someone's done the research on that, because I think it is quite a relevant case. It's like you might deny that on the surface that education is not important, but when it comes down to it, is that still the one triggering the decision? I mean, you can see that in who gets hired, I guess. So yeah, absolutely interesting to see that. But yeah, so a couple of things to think about. And again, we're not going to sit here and just hammer skills-based hiring. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this conversation is just really feel around the edges of the debate, and to map out the contours of where there may be a future issue. Similar to, when we're all shifting to remote, reminds me very much of when, 2.5 years or so ago, everyone was charging forward and saying hybrid is the future. Now, hybrid may well be the future, could well be the current present. But there was lots of things that we could have considered prior to charging forward that might have saved a few companies from having to make those ugly decisions where they're saying, oh no, we have previously promised this and now we've got to pull back that because, when it was tested in reality, it wasn't adequately. It was revealed to have these issues. I
see in your name, because we're having a conversation, but like I've seen your name with some organizations and they've just taken a quote, a line, and it would suggest that you're like the biggest champion of skills first hiring. I won't mention the vendors, but there's a couple of things where I don't know where they got the quote from, and the perfect sentence makes sense, but I know you, and I've seen you talk about this, and it seems that, even, and maybe I'm wrong, right, but have you been taken out of context as being the number one flag-waving supporter of this as the way forward for everything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where I saw that, but whether you saw it. But yeah, I do appear in different sort of things that I latterly discover. That's not to say that people have kind of not got permission. I'm generally very permissive, so I default to yes everything. And it's fair to say I probably don't scrutinize too much about what goes outside or whatever. I probably did say something at one point or whatnot, so that's all good. But I think that firstly, with skills-based hiring, I'm hugely sympathetic with it at a conceptual level. I think that it makes sense. I mean, the first thing you said is like, okay, why don't we, assess people based on the things they can do rather than their prestige or their, their prior network or whatever it is that's caused them to be considered to be a candidate. That seems to me like an obvious thing and a positive thing. I think there's implementation challenges. And that's where I first got thinking, hang on, we're maybe charging a bit too fast on this. Like, how do you actually do this? And we're getting better at understanding this. But secondly, there's also, some deeper philosophical problems or challenges, should I say, that I'd like to explore and debate. Because what we don't want to do is to say, right, we are now switching full focus to this, and then find out actually the outcomes don't quite match to what we expected. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned that I was talking about is how difficult it might be to do. And some companies are going forward and trying to build skills taxonomies, for instance. That seems to be okay. We should build a skills taxonomy, because how are we going to do skills-based hiring without having a massive library of all of the skills? You're actually one of the people that have broken down the complexity of a job into tasks and therefore skills. With SocialTalent, when you broke down, okay, here are all of the things a recruiter should be doing, most people think that's 10 things. It turns out it's about 150 things, each of which requires some sort of skill to do. So you imagine doing that to, a complex company with different job families, different job functions. Obviously, it seems like a huge amount of work to do. So, that seems to me like we need to think about that before, if we're going to launch that approach, we need to understand that that's a massive undertaking. and you might not be able to get it to the implementation stage. So yeah, lots of things to try and wrestle with. Practical implementation is probably one of the more important ones to think about, really.
Oh, I think you got to start there. Like I was, and just to put it on the record, right? I think skills first hiring has an absolute place. If you have top of funnel issues with your hiring, it's absolutely something you should be considering. You know what I mean? And I mean there is like there's just not enough candidates in the market, or your organization can't get enough talent because you don't pay enough, or your brand isn't enough, or you're in the wrong location, or it could be that a particular type of funnel, perhaps you're looking for marginalized candidates who've been excluded from the recruiting process traditionally, and you want to hire more of them or have more of them in your funnel. And so therefore you and you're not finding that, and you're thinking, well, how do I widen that funnel? How do I open up to other candidates? These are all really good cases for considering skills-based hiring. They really are. And I'm all for it. But you said it, it's complicated, right? And I think most recruiting teams aren't set up to deal with it, because when you get into the detail, if you imagine a team where, let's say you have top of funnel issues and you can't get enough talent, and the hiring manager wants to hire folks, and maybe if they want to hire a brand new team of 6 people to do whatever the heck they want to do, and you're saying, well, let's take a skills-based hiring approach. Let's hire people with the skills, not necessarily the experience or the pedigree, or the education for it. And we go identify those people. They'll walk into a team, but no one's actually ever done the job before. And because there's no experience, there's no, maybe the consistency around the metric of measure wasn't so high because there's no third-party qualification measurement of that. But the experience piece in particular is difficult. Like the reality is you're going to need to have probably a mix of people with experience and not experience, not all skill-based hires. And then you're going to need, in the folks that are maybe the managers that aren't the new hires, you're going to need a really strong ability to coach and develop. And I got into this conversation with a guy who runs the global leadership learning program, a leadership development program for Amazon. And we got into a deep conversation about this because he's quite passionate about perhaps the misconception of skill-based hiring. And we talked about, call it what you want, but we call it skills, competencies, and mastery. And it's like, you have a skill in something, you can prove you can do it on a test. A competency is you've done it maybe, the 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, although it's been proved to be not quite right. And then you've got maybe mastery, which is somebody who's an expert at it, who's maybe teaching that thing. We all know that in teams you need people at different levels of competence. Competencies is what this was called 25 years ago, right? And we built whole competency models and competency frameworks. And it's like that we just got bored with competencies, so let's just talk about something different, skills. And the cynic in me says there is something in that loads of software vendors trying to sell you a product to build taxonomies around skills and match people around skills. And like we had this conversation the other day where I shared with you, Hung, that this view that some people propose where the job is over and it's all about skills moving around an organization to get work done, like it's nonsense. It's nonsense. It has directional truth in that we're becoming less coupled to the traditional job and there's more movement. But an idea is that there's no teams. You have a whole organization of 10,000 people with different skills, and every morning you wake up and says what work needs to get done, and you organize the people around that. It happens in no company in the world. I don't think it's going to happen in the next 5-10 years either.
No, that's very interesting. This is talking about jobs being an aggregate of tasks, right? And then if you can figure out what those tasks are, potentially you can disaggregate the job, and you parcel those tasks to whoever it is that is available or has capacity to do it. Helps with load balancing, helps with interest. Everyone who is doing a job today has a bunch of tasks that you'd rather not do, even if you have a skill doing it. So presumably, if you can disaggregate the job, you can push some of those tasks away. You don't want to do it. So I get what you're saying. However, something just occurred to me with regards to what the shape of the organization might be. I mean, again, if you use anything like Upwork or Fiverr, or you interact with people that are very task-based, TaskRabbit even says it on the tin. It's not necessarily a job this person's doing. They're actually fulfilling a task that you would otherwise be doing. So it's a component of your job. You've actually isolated it and just like popped it off, and that person's executing it at a high level with very high level of skill very consistently and taking it off your plate. Now, I think what skills-based hiring may be talking about is trying to bring that style of work into a single employer setting. So rather than me having to go to an external market to source that, there's an internal market where I can source that capability. Now, I'm not saying people are imagining data entry is a thing. It's probably something more sophisticated. It's more like, a bit write an RFP or do all those types of things. But I don't want to do that, or I can't do that. Perhaps I can put the task somewhere into a marketplace that then gets picked up by somebody else, who, if they've got capacity, they can go ahead and execute on that. That seems to me to be feasible. I don't think that's entirely out of the picture. And particularly, again, we don't want to go down the AI route, because I don't think, although I think skills-based hiring does dovetail into the AI conversation, because you got to then think, right, what then is more automatable, and presumably if you disaggregate a job into tasks, suddenly it becomes more automatable, because each task becomes more, it's more simple to instruct a human being and a piece of software to execute on that, rather than a job, which could be a very densely network set of tasks that's difficult to tease out. So there's an AI conversation in that somewhere. But yeah, I think it's feasible. Internal marketplace, isn't that what we're trying to get to? It seems to me like a positive thing to have more fluidity internally, and maybe skills-based hiring is the thing that unlocks it.
So certainly, a skills database is handy for an organization, in that, you imagine a small company 5 years ago, 20 people all in one room, and you go, oh crap, you stand up and go, can anyone use Photoshop? And Hung in the back goes, oh, I'm okay in Photoshop. Great, can you give me a hand? Like that's a skills kind of marketplace where, in a small organization, informally you go, can anyone use X or do X? And then somebody puts their hand up and they jump in for an hour or two. And maybe that person over time starts helping the marketing team more, and maybe eventually moves into a marketing role. Okay, because they do that. And I guess, yes, if you're a 20,000 person organization, how do you scale that? Well, we need to kind of map out what all these different skills might be and find some way of connecting them. That's a kind of skills culture, a skills learning environment. It's not hiring. Hiring's different. Now, I've seen some good comments here, because the skills, the positive bits about skills-based hiring overlap with concepts that already exist, like screening in versus screening out, as I think Bob is alluding to in the chat here, which is really positive. And if you take a more critical view of the job requirement, right? So this is a skills analysis of a job. And let's say you're a recruiter and you're working with a hiring manager, or you're a hiring manager by yourself, and you're kind of going, what's needed? What are the kind of core competencies or skills in here? Now, chances are you'll find those skills in somebody who does the same job as somebody else. Let's not ignore that, right? Because if you're in a BDR role in a sales team, chances are the skills required in company A are reasonably similar to company B if somebody's in a BDR role. So getting a CV with experience as a BDR is probably a good thing, and you're probably going to tick a lot of those boxes. And I think with the positive bits of skills-based hiring is saying, yeah, but listen, maybe there's a lot of people who've never worked as a BDR who don't even know what that initialism stands for, but actually they could do all the things a BDR can do, and we should consider them. That's the positive bit, where you actually break down the skills, which I'd argue good recruiters kind of always did. They'll come along with a candidate that wasn't the profile and go, but let me tell you why I think Hung could do this job. And then they highlight the 4 things that the job requires. They show how Hung has those 4 things, or 3.5 of them. And the person goes, actually, let's give it a go. And you test them. Somebody still has to teach them to be a BDR. Right, that's just still required in this analogy. So you still can't hire everybody with no experience, but it does open the door to more more screening in approach, and to more diverse candidates for that role, and a bigger talent pool for the roles that it is suitable for.
I mean, again, I think semantics is quite important here. Like, skills to me is quite tightly associated with task. So it's proximate to task. So in other words, there's an guys, let me know if you have a definition of a skill. I actually realize that I'm trying to isolate what this looks like. So for me, skills is quite close to an output that is a task. So in other words, that's one definition. Second definition, it is something you can learn. So 100% it's it's a learnable thing. That's why it's a skill and not an attribute or a character trait or something like that, which may be more innate and it's genetic or whatnot. A skill is something you can learn, and you can get good or bad at based on the fact you can learn on it. So proximate to task, something you can learn. What you're talking about there about the BDR, that experience, aren't we talking about like attributes in that case? Because the person doesn't have skills immediately to be able to be a BDR. They've got the potential to do that, but because they can't output a result right away. They're going to need to have skills training to get to that point. So maybe they've got, I don't know, an enthusiasm, or they've got some adjacent skill, perhaps.
But let's break it down, right? Because this is where it gets interesting. This is where we should be talking, right? Not for the whole thing, but this is where anyone doing skills-based hiring, they should be talking about like this, which is, let's say, a BDR, business development rep, for anyone who doesn't know what that is. A BDR is going to have to do outbound phone calls for sales. They're going to have to do email writing. They're going to have to have tenacity to follow up. They're going to be able to pitch and communicate something, right? So if you break it down, you go, okay, so somebody who's good on the phone, so that's a skill. They have a quality of phone. They can sell. They can persuade. That's a skill we need to be able to define. They need to have tenacity. They need to be able to get back up and face rejection potentially. So let's write that down. They need to be able to competently communicate by email and follow up and follow processes and use computer systems. You break down 6 or 7 skills there. The reality is there's people in lots of different jobs who have those combinations, or it could be you have a job and then you might have a side hustle, or you might work for a volunteer organization. And so some of the skills might come from your job, some might not come from your job. And so the beauty is, when it's done right, is that somebody who's never worked as a BDR will come along and go, yeah, but listen, you've worked at a pub, you've got strong communication skills, you've also basically, let's say, done all you work for your volunteer organization and you're trying to basically organize people to volunteer their time. So you send tons of emails to people to try and persuade them to maybe donate money or volunteer their time. So you've shown that written capacity. Over here, you have the in-person communication skills, in-person phone, same difference. I'm all good with that. So you start going, okay, that person who works in a pub, who volunteers in their local charity group, all of a sudden could be a great BDR. And that's where you go, oh, fantastic. Now I get it. Now I see how you can open up the talent pool. And then your screening process will become, how do you basically test for those? So again, you're not now looking for them on the CV. You're like, let's try and test to see, are these 5 or 6 competencies? As opposed to just saying, find me a BDR who works in a different company. Right, so that's great, but the bigger point is there's a spectrum of roles. There's roles that will be almost all skill-based, and the role of BDR or an SDR in a sales team, for the most part, is people who've never worked in the job before, because you typically last 12 to 18 months. And so it's very heavy on early in career hiring or people from all different backgrounds, all the way across to very technical professional roles or legal roles, medical roles, where it's heavy on education, heavy on experience. And to me, it's just to start the conversation with, it's a spectrum. It isn't that it's skills-based hiring or not. It's a case of it's skills-based hiring when you can, when it makes sense. But when it makes sense, you have to do a lot more than just read CVs and pass them on in those situations.
Yeah, firstly, there's one thing I want to underline to the crowd. Something that the first time I've heard this, you're thinking about skills-based hiring as like a particular an appropriate strategy based on a context, but not necessarily suitable universally. Like, we shouldn't assume it's
Yes.
suitable across the entire organization. It could be, for instance, the context is we're struggling with pipeline, actually. So there's not enough candidates here. We have to look at adjacent industries. Therefore, we have to change the way which we're recruiting. We have to focus on this capability, this skill, in order to do so. So I think that's a really important component. You've also mentioned something I've never heard anyone say either, which I think is really significant. Perhaps the ideal team is a mix of people that have been hired via skills-based hiring, a bunch of people that have come in through, I don't know, expertise-based hiring or experience-based hiring. Maybe a mix of that is the most positive output out here. So those are, I think, really important points to make. There's a person, Jurgen, who's just said something really interesting. How is this different from competencies? And this is another thing I struggle with, because I think a lot of the things you've discussed there, Johnny, I'd describe that as competencies. A competency would be something that is kind of a behavior. It's sort of like a prior behavior. There's skills in that because there's the skills that produce behaviors or contribute to a behavior, but also with values, I guess, go into creating a competency. But here's the thing I want to say: if we're doing skills-based hiring, surely you can only hire people that have achieved a certain level of expertise in a skill. Like, it makes no sense to say I'm doing skills-based hiring and then just hire raw material, like just a 16, 17-year-old person, loads of enthusiasm, loads of intelligence, let's say, and certainly capability of learning it. But because of the lack of experience, this person is not able to do the skill that I'm looking for. So how are we doing skills-based hiring on that situation?
So I slightly nuance the words you're using there, right? Because experience can be a dangerous word. I know where you're coming from, right? But you pull right back up. We teach a very, very standard 4-box methodology on how do you hire, right? Pretty much everybody uses this in every part of the world. You're going to use different words than I'm going to use right now, but we look at the kind of four components of what's required to hire. One is the what, and that's your skills / competencies / whatever the heck, right? So what do you bring to the table in terms of, let's say, kind of reading the resume, right? I can use Photoshop, I can pick up a phone, I can write emails, whatever that might be. So that is one part of it. It's one of the 4, but it's not the only thing. The second bit is what you might call your values or your behaviors, which is with that set of skills or competencies. And again, let's not get too stuck on the semantics of what the words are. Skills, competencies, mastery. With those skills, how do you apply them? So that's the values, behaviors. Because you can have the skill of communication, you know how to do it, but you're an asshole, or you're direct, or you're indirect. Right? So it's how do you apply that? They're the behaviors, oftentimes values. Now, and then unfortunately is sometimes called culture fit, right? Which is just the set of behaviors that we expect to be normalized in our business or in this role. But then the third and fourth piece, so that's the how. The third piece is the achievements, I think, which you're getting at as well. So rather than experience, I'd say, how have you put that collection of skills and behaviors, so skills, competencies, and the way you behave together to achieve something? You need to measure and test for that. So can you use those and actually get stuff done? Right, which isn't quite, experience is a dangerous word because experience tend to look for, you think more means, more doing it means better outcome, as opposed to, no, I just want, you're going to do it very infrequently, but you have a high success rate. It's the success rate that I'm interested in. And then the fourth box is the motivation. Like, great, the person has all the skills, they have the right values to apply them, and they've done it well in the past, but they don't want to work here. They wouldn't want to work here. This isn't the job for them. You have to have that fourth bit. And so we kind of forget that even if we're going to go with skills-based hiring, it's one of 4 things we need to consider when we're hiring a candidate. It isn't the only thing we're looking at.
Right, as another great way, to visualize exactly that. So skills-based hiring, it needs to be within the context of other things, because a couple of things interesting there. You could be highly skilled in a desired thing that you're recruiting for. However, your manner of delivering that skill could just be abrasive to the way in which the current team, how the current team operates. In which case, you are a bad hire, irrespective of this. However, I don't know, like, what you got to then bring in some of the non-skills based hiring techniques in order to make sure that that person doesn't get into the company. So, for instance, it is a face-to-face interview. Then it is a meet the team exercise. I know we want to chuck the term culture fit out the window, but I actually want to bring that back. I think we can rehabilitate that term. I don't think it's necessarily bias. It is just understanding, is the working mode, is the practical, how this person manifests the skill in terms of behavior, is it actually compatible with how we like to work as a team? And oftentimes you could get on very well with someone on a personal level. You could respect them. They could even be like really close people to you personally, but their operating model, the way in which they operate, you find really clashes with how you operate. And in fact, you don't want to be in the same team together because of that sort of dissonance between the style of delivering that skill.
And
So yes,
that's the thing. They're the questions we should be asking. So rather than having an argument over is it skill based or not skills based, right? Because to me that's the red herring. It's a distraction from the conversation you gotta have with yourself if you're a hiring manager or with the hiring manager if you're a recruiter. We should dig into those things. So when someone says, I need someone who's like our team, in line with our values, there you go, great. Talk to me what that means. If it means I want a bunch of white guys who go to the pub and watch soccer, I'm not hiring that. That's wrong. That kind of culture fit is all wrong. But if it's kind of like, well, we like people who can respectfully disagree, but then when we make a decision, move on with that decision. That's a very specific thing you can define and assess for with behavioral and situational questions, interview questions. And that's okay when someone is, if they're talking about culture fit and they mean that, and we tease it out to mean respectful disagreement, but then you move on with the ultimate decision made, which isn't, a democracy. That's a very important thing that you should be able to define as an organization or a team and say that's what we hire for. But people will come from different backgrounds who can display that value or behavior, and that's okay as long as they can do it or demonstrate they've done it in the past comfortably and they're going to fit in here. So it all boils down to proper assessment of the job, really digging into the things, not making assumptions. And if we do that, then we can apply the right style of assessment, and we can look for the appropriate person, whether it's skills based or not skills based, in that one of four boxes. So I just think it highlights the fact that we're just not doing a good enough job when we go to market and we break down what we want. Because you talk about, a culture fit. It could be the culture ad. And I've seen teams who will say, let's say there's four types of personality. They're going, in every team we want all four. We want that diversity of thought. So they'll assess everybody in the team. What do we have? We've 2 of 2, we've 1 of 1, we've 1 of 3, we've no 4s. Let's find a person who has a 4. So it's actually deliberately trying to find the missing way of thinking in a team. That can be really valuable, right? That kind of culture ad piece. But just have a logical reason why you're doing these things, and not just this good instinct or I read a LinkedIn article, I'm going to do skills-based hiring. Like, tell me why you're doing skills-based hiring. Give me the logic of it. How does it solve the problem you have? Because if it solves the problem you have, knock yourself out. Go for it.
have you seen an example of skills-based hiring in any of the companies that you've been working with, that you think, okay, this group here is kind of a lot on the right journey? Because by the way, folks, even though skills-based hiring, kind of the first term emerged really just about pre-COVID, I believe, and then it kind of went away because obviously COVID was like massively dominant. When the conversation shifted to remote, then AI emerged and it was like dominating again. Now it's kind of like resuscitated. So we're still early in this dialogue, and therefore we don't expect any single company today to necessarily, be the exemplar. But I'd like to know whether you've, we don't need to name names, but have you found any business that you think, what, I think they're kind of correct in terms of how they're approaching this, and what does that look like?
So yes, but I'll lean on Tom State's point here, Tom. It's really, really good one. It's not exactly as you'd expect, right? So I rarely see companies on either extremes of the spectrum. But let me talk to you about a couple of examples that are more towards the skills-based hiring example. One is GitLab. So Rob Allen runs talent over at GitLab, and he was sharing with me that last year when they were building out their AI team, as I imagine lots of organizations are building out the AI team, you couldn't find enough people who had experience in AI the way that people wanted to do it, because it was just so new and it exploded so fast. So what they had to do was break down the skills required to actually do these new AI roles. And they found them in traditional software engineering and R&D, and they basically put them together, and then they went to market and they opened up the talent pool. And so they did deliberately try and find a handful of people who had actually worked with LLMs and AI, and they dotted them around the teams, but they largely built them from people who had skills that were adjacent to the direct experience required. So it was the skill, not the experience, and they put them together, right? So fantastic, right? The other example I'll give you is oh gosh, now it's gone from mind, is it? Sorry, I had another example that come to me now, right? But very similarly, when you're, it was actually Zalando, Virginia Tirado, when she was running the TA team there, she was tasked with improving the gender balance of the engineering teams. And traditionally, and she's talked about this publicly, so I'm happy to share it, which was she found that the level that they were hiring for predominantly, let's call it level 8. I can't remember the levels or what it meant, but let's call it highly experienced folks. They had budget. They were hiring people with a lot of experience into these teams, and they just couldn't get enough women in the talent pools because for various institutional reasons, there weren't enough women who were progressing to that level in experience in the market. And so it was impossible to solve that top of funnel problem to solve for diversity. So she went to the business and said, if you're serious about this, I need you to drop down the level requirements, let's say a level 6 or level 5. I don't mean hire less qualified people. I mean, literally the role doesn't need a level 8. And if you keep asking for level 8, there's just not enough women in the marketplace for that. But you give me a level 5 and I can hire loads more women, but I need you to then upskill the current level 8 employees to be better coaches, to get those women to be progressing throughout their career and kind of filling this gap. And so that was a deliberate, it wasn't so much a skills first approach. It was kind of re-leveling, taking some of the requirements out, making it more about the skills to do the job and not the level of experience. So experience is what they would have looked for. They would have looked at proxies like years or job titles. And she's like, no. Really, you don't need that. But let's downgrade the level and I can find the talent pools. And her team, the recruiting team, began solving those problems. So two slightly different examples where you open up, you look at a funnel challenge, and you basically look at the core skills required and prioritize that over experience or job title to get the job.
Yeah, very interesting. So I think those are interesting case studies, interesting companies to talk about. And I think the people who are involved in both of those organizations tend to be quite public personalities anyway. So feel free to reach out to them and catch up. Okay, so skills-based hiring, I think I agree anyway. There's definitely a case where there's a funnel problem, as you say. You need to expand the funnel. You haven't got the talent pool. Skills-based hiring seems to be a way to do that because prior to that, you have instructed your recruiters or have just been by default looking on experience. That's basically how you search for candidates anyway. How you identify a viable candidate via a CV is typically this person has done this thing before, therefore they're going to be good at a good option for this future thing. So funnel problem, I think that's the case. I think skills-based hiring has moved beyond that, though. It's definitely gone to more than just a funnel problem, hasn't it? It's like, okay, if it works for a funnel problem, let's expand it to like everything that we do in recruiting, and maybe that then creates perhaps a more diverse pool of talent into every sort of funnel, and maybe that's what we're looking to do. Have you seen any companies actually sort of do that, where it isn't a funnel-based problem? They've just rolled it out as a general principle and have moved ahead. And what are we observing from that decision?
Several talking about it. I'm trying to caution them against doing it as a blanket approach. And rather than making it about one or the other, I'm trying to push them to instead focus on screening in versus screening out, better questioning of the requirement for educational requirements in the job specs, better interrogation of whether you do actually need X years of experience, etc. So I think, we live in a society where too much it's this confrontation about one thing versus the other. And so it's trying to just educate and nuance people to say, you know what, it isn't about one or the other. And moving your whole team to skills-based hiring is wrong. But there's loads of elements of it that are helpful. And let's try and focus on the elements that are really helpful and can really make a difference to your team. And just to kind of redirect it to that middle, right? Because hiring people is messy. Right? We all know this. If you're in this podcast, you get this. It's messy. I was talking to someone the other week and we were talking about the problems they were having in hiring. And the VP of TA turns, Johnny, can you just make it easy? Can you just give us the silver bullet? And he was being deliberately facetious, because like we all want a silver bullet. And it's tempting to see skills-based hiring as a silver bullet. Like it's not. Of course it's not, right? There isn't. AI isn't a silver bullet either. But these are all potentially helpful tools if used in the right way and thought about the right way. But the big thing that I realized, right, and the conversation here, I think gives me evidence of this, is that, in the recruiting world, we don't even understand skills, competencies, mastery. We're not even thinking about a 4-box approach and a consistent way of doing it. So I just think there's, and I'm going to say this because it's the nature of my business, but there's more education required, more knowledge required. You don't have to get it from SocialTalent, you can get it from other places. But there's more education required. And I think there's going to be more pressure on recruiters to be much more talent experts. Because what is evident, and what I think is a non-negotiable, is the business are reading these articles and they're going to be pushing back and asking recruiters for skills first, etc. You need to better understand it, and whatever side you fall on, or somewhere in the middle, you need to have really good conversations with hiring managers. You need to walk them through skills, competencies, ask the right questions. So that's the one thing that I'm certain with all of this, is that we need to get better, and we need to understand L&D concepts, other talent development concepts, not just how do we find more talent.
You know what, Johnny, I'm pleased you said that, because that's the kind of ulterior motive of this podcast or this live stream. There will be a series of conversations on skills and assessment of skills, and how we do those assessments throughout the rest of this year on Brainfood Live. Because I think you're absolutely right. The job of recruitment has kind of shifted a little bit away from the discovery of candidates, the finding of candidates, to assessment of candidates. How do we actually do that better? And we need to know a lot of these terms at a much deeper level than we do. I know a lot of people say, "Hung, you're just arguing semantics." I get it, and you know, that's a worthy accusation. I stand guilty as charged. But however, I do think that unless we separate the concepts and very clearly understand how they relate to each other, we might end up charging forward doing one thing when in fact we actually want to do another, and then getting confused as we do so. And I see no reason why we shouldn't kind of correctly understand, how do we define skills versus competencies versus traits versus whatever? Why can't we define that and come to some sort of understanding? Because actually, when we go and do the assessment, we need to understand what we're assessing for. Otherwise it will have an unequal test, an inadequate test, and worse, we might have an inconsistent test. So for instance, if you've got a bunch of hiring managers and you don't have a shared understanding what skills is, you will have different hiring managers assessing different things in different ways, and you'll have a very inconsistent experience, bad for candidate and bad for hiring performance. So yeah, we do need to dive into the semantics a little bit. Okay, folks, I want to just make sure we do a quick pause, because we always do this in every show. It's very important that we Brainfood Live is a conversation starter, not a conversation ender, but we do have to come off air in about 20 minutes or so, and it will be a terrible shame if that resulted in the kind of a hard stop on this conversation. There's lots more to say. The way to say this, continue the conversation, is of course to connect with everyone who is on this call and make sure you can take this off air and have a chat with everyone who's here. So take this moment, grab your LinkedIn URL, put it in the chat stream, and then connect with everyone else who has done the same. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, do the same as that. Grab your LinkedIn URL, stick it into the comment thread, and then just connect with whoever's done that. More or less, I'm getting feedback from sort of people who've done this, is that more or less everyone agrees to accept the request if it's come via this route, because we've all identified people are interested in this topic, and they want to just expand network with people that want to explore that further. So go ahead and do that. Okay, Johnny, let's talk about the seniority aspect of this, because I think there's a dimension where skills-based hiring kind of fits well, and there's also a dimension where I think you get candidate resistance. So I'm thinking, look, individual operator level, I think you could do skills-based hiring there. No one, like, if I was going for a job, someone was going to say, you're going for this marketing job, we need to test how much you know about, SEO or whatever. I'm happy to do a test on that and poke around a project and figure this out. All well and good. Go to senior level, C-level, and maybe even senior manager level. I can see a lot of resistance from senior managers saying, listen, I'm beyond operator. My job is leadership, execution of decisions, etc. This is not skills-based hiring for me. So is skills-based hiring suitable for certain levels of seniority, like, again, proximate to task, or not? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
So let me give you some concrete examples of this. So rather than, let's take one of the 4 boxes, is that box we're going to call the what. that we're going to assess for, and that it includes skills, competencies, and those kind of terms, right? Again, let's not argue with the semantics of which is which, but let's just all agree there's a bunch of things there: skills, competencies, masteries that we do have to assess for. I recently hired a VP of finance. I'm currently interviewing for a C-level role in our business, and so I'm interviewing these candidates, and to try and assess that box, I'm using behavioral interview questions, situational interview questions, and I'm pivoting in those questions. And I find a lot of candidates, senior level candidates, very senior level candidates, are not comfortable with the specifics of, let's say, a behavioral interview question. Tell me about a time when you had to. Then they say, well, generally what I do, and you're like, I'm going to pause you there. I'm looking for a specific example, so we could focus me on the company, the role, the situation. Tell me the date. What was the scenario? What happened in the situation? It's the gold standard, the second to best gold standard of assessing and predicting with some sort of validity that someone's ability in something, and it should be at all levels of roles. But I do find that sometimes. My business partner Vince was talking about a friend of his who was hiring a CEO for their business in the US, and he met a candidate and said, how did you interview? He goes, we had a chat. And there's a kind of misconception, when you get to senior roles, you just have a chat. Absolute nonsense. It's more important to do the skill assessment, competency assessment, whatever you want to call it, at the higher levels, because the impact of a bad hire is even better, even greater. And the candidates really appreciate it. You have candidates. I have people who tell me it's actually refreshing. I love the way you really put the effort into interviewing. It's a really quality process. And if you're just meeting and having a chat and you get a job offer, it's kind of a bit weird. So I actually think it's the reverse. You should be really comfortable as a hiring organization or team, as a recruiter, in putting those detailed assessments in for the most senior roles, because it matters more. We did behavioral interview questions, we did psychometric evaluations, like everything, because we have a platform of 100 experts who tell us how to do it, and we eat our own dog food. We drink our own Kool-Aid, so to speak, and we apply it, and it gives a much better process. So I 100% think that it actually goes the other way around, Hung, that we should be more comfortable putting a more stringent requirement on the skills assessment piece, but also the other parts for more senior candidates. But I think we don't do it as an industry. People think senior candidates have a different conversational style of interviewing, and it's wrong.
No, I agree with everything you say, Johnny. We shouldn't do this, but I think the reality out there is that that's what we do. We let's say. We can imagine. I mean, actually, Sandra is the exec search person here with some experience. I'd be interested, Sandra, what your thoughts are on this. I mean, how do executive candidates respond to interviews where there is a set piece assessment? Bear in mind, by the way, I'm also, again, I could be wrong, but I am really connecting skills-based assessment with an assessment, skills-based hiring with an assessment. So in other words, there is a test of a skill. It's not a conversation per se. I don't even think necessarily it's an interview because...
Well, can I throw a bomb in for this one? I had a great conversation with 3 customers yesterday where they were saying, so they're one of the most well-known employers, high-end employers in the world, right, so to speak. Hard to get into. People think it was a pedigree employer. And they're really good at assessments, but they're having real problems with AI cheating on the assessments on the candidate side. And so they're having to bring in really powerful proctoring tools to basically make sure that people aren't cheating. So there's some of the assessments are the best standard, but we live in a world now where candidates can put AI in, cheat, like math tests, etc. So then they were trying to invent technologies to proctor these things, and they were even talking about having to go back to in-person assessment dates, rooms where you can't bring a computer into the room and sit down with a pen and paper, right? Because it's got to that stage. But we had a big chat about a really good behavioral or situational interview question exposes the truth in the candidate, even if they're on Zoom or Teams. Because if you ask follow-up questions, dig into the detail, get precise as an interviewer, as a recruiter, it's really hard to fake that, to cheat that. The AI can't keep up, and it has to be based on reality if you're asking the really good questions. So I think we are moving into an age where the cheating part actually makes those digital assessments even harder, because the skill on the other side is getting better at cheating them. So we have to have a mix of tools. I think we have to be able to mix it up to try and assess folks.
Yeah, and by the way, I've another thing I'm going to do this year is basically subject myself to every assessment out there. Okay, so if you're an assessment vendor, I want to take your test. I'm going to do the test because I want to just experience this. Like, am I clicking through a form? Am I putting on a VR headset? Am I having some sort of psychotherapy? What is going on? Am I doing multiple choice? Like, I want to basically go through it just to experience it as candidate. But I'm also kind of thinking, all right, the ideal cases obviously have a battery of these. Like, you just don't do one. The more assessment you do, the better it is, we assume. The trade-off is simply the practicality of it. The more you do, obviously, the less scalable it is. Probably it'll degrade candidate experience because you're asking a lot of the candidate each and every time. And there's going to be some sort of compromise that we have to reach at some stage. But anyway, that's my plan to go through this, because I think there's some really good technologies that have emerged. Some people have mentioned a few already, like TechWolf, for instance. They're generally trying to, understand how skills operate and provide multiple different tests. Loads of different companies. Mackie are doing this. There's loads. So we're going to try and do a series, basically. So expect this happening quite a lot in Brainfood Live, if you're interested to know more. I might even do tests like live. Maybe that's something worth. It might be amusing to watch. Then again, me flicking through a questionnaire, clicking, yes, I strongly agree. I'm not sure whether that's good TV.
I'd love to see you do that. I'd love to see you do it, Hung, to take that challenge, but then you do it and then try and cheat and see if they notice and see what the difference is. Just as an idea.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we had this conversation also with another friend of ours, Arctic Shores, who do game-based assessments, and they did some really good research on job candidate usage of generative AI, and obviously it's like very prevalent, particularly younger generations, very fluent with usage. And their recommendation was also obviously to design a assessment process on the proviso that these candidates will be using Gen AI in the same way they're using technology. Like, there's a big T. So don't try and they advise not to try and detect it with proctoring, because at some point you're going to break, or every test is beatable, so to say, and then you might run into a lawsuit. And secondly, it's like you get with the real world, like get with the fact that this is happening. If they're using these tools to succeed in the assessment, maybe that's not so bad a thing, because it gives them at least the fluent candidates in AI, and we want more of that. So
it's like saying you're not allowed to use the internet to do this interview because that'd be cheating. It's like, well, can I use the internet in my job? Of course you can. Yeah, we expect you to use the internet in your job. It's like, well, why can't I use the internet to do my interview, or use Excel or use a calculator? Yeah, it's sometimes ridiculous.
Okay. In terms of coming to the end of this chat now, Johnny, as a final kind of leave it situation, can you give us two things? Number one, how do you predict skills-based hiring, the discourse is going to evolve over the next 12 months or so?
I think it's going to go away as a concept, but I think the core of it should hopefully remain that we should have more of a skills focus. I think I'm seeing a bit of dying down around skills-based hiring, by the way, is a subset of this kind of skills organization. This whole movement, Workday did it and then they kind of pulled back on it, and a few other organizations have talked about it, and lots of L&D and skilling platforms and talent platforms are selling solutions around this, right? So there's always a money motivator behind this stuff, unfortunately, right? But so I think it'll die down and move on to the next thing. But there is a lot of merit in it. It's not to dismiss it totally, again, because this shouldn't be a binary conversation. And I hope the parts of it that are relevant, that, screening in, less of a focus on education and experience where you don't need it, more robust assessment processes, opening up talent pools when necessary and being open-minded to it. They're the things I hope will persist. Maybe they won't be kept under this umbrella and there'll be less of a focus on skills-based hiring. But they're the things that I hope stay. Again, as Jürgen said, the hype's over, but what persists, and I hope a lot of it will persist, right, is the stuff that probably was there before. Maybe this helped amplify parts of it. But I remember talking to somebody about skill-based hiring, and she's not in recruiting, and I was talking to her about this, and she said, can I stop you there? She goes, skills-based hiring, what the fuck were we doing before this, if not skills-based hiring? And I had to pause for a second to just remember everybody who doesn't work in this industry and go, yeah, it's a fair point. Like, when you're outside the recruiting industry and you look at us and you look at the things we talk about, sometimes they probably think we're all mad. So that's my big thing around this. I think we'll move on.
No, good context. And by the way, we're kind of like being anti-hype at this point, but change often happens through the hype cycle. So I don't think
Does.
it's necessarily anything to be too upset about. We just know that once the tide washes out, so to say, there may well be some very useful things left on the shore that we can pick up and improve our hiring performance on.
Like, listen, I
Um,
treasure my Hung Lee NFT. I use it. I use it all the time. It's such a big thing to me.
it doesn't exist, by the way. But all right, let's let you go, Johnny. Listen, really good speaking to you, man. Great to see you, of course. And yeah, hopefully we'll catch up soon. I'll be in Dublin, as I mentioned, in September, I
Right.
believe. So if we're gonna make if I make it more than just a day or two, then maybe we can get some sort of get together with all the Dublin Brainfooders and the social talent mob and
Well,
all that stuff.
and a big thank you and hello to so many names I know who've been popping up who I haven't seen in years, talked to in years. So thanks you all for joining in, saying hello. It's great to see so many friendly names, if not faces, and to see you, Hung, as well.
Great stuff. Take care, Johnny.
Thanks, everyone.
Wasn't that great, folks? Always a pleasure to speak to smart people in on this show. And Johnny Campbell certainly is one of those. Okay. By the way, we might do more of these. I mean, you might have noticed there's been a few like solo type of conversations I'm having rather than just panel. I just again exploring with the format. And I think this affords us the ability to dive deeper on certain topics, which I want to do as well as have a more discursive style as well. Next week, of course, we are back with Brainfood Live on air. It is the next sort of the last Brainfood Live before the huge event that is Wreckfest. So we've got a special show dedicated to people who are giving their first talk at a big event, and it's called Public Speaking for Newbies. And we're going to get together a lot of people who've been trained on public speaking. We're going to get event organizers on, we're going to get MCs on, and we're going to try and give people some advice on how to deliver a brilliant talk. So if you are a person that is about to do a presentation or you want to do more public speaking, this is the show for you. Sign up for the show. It's already on the channel. Follow the channel if you want to hear updates on this. But it'll be on next week, a Friday, 2 p.m. It's going to be a great show. Okay, that's about it. I will let you go. Have a good week, everybody. Thanks for watching.